Okay, so this is part 2 of the Jordan Peterson stuff. Now we're going to look into actually some of the comments that really give a lot of real insight into how people are really led by their biases and prejudices. And it's if you're here to learn, this is something valuable. Instead of looking at it as some kind of criticism, there's some real insights into yourself. Because the least popular work I do is anything to do with being introspective and, like looking deeply into yourself and the places that, you hide, because most people will see that as an inadequacy or a defect, and immediately the defensive systems just come up and they don't want to face it. So one of the biggest paths to growth is to get past this idea that looking into yourself means that there's something defective that needs to be fixed. If you can get past that idea that you need to be fixed, then you've got a chance of actually growing and healing wounds. But if you still believe in that idea that, by looking introspectively and, extracting your inconsistencies, your contradictions, the places where you lie to yourself, that's all that is just evidence of how defective you are, well then there's no possibility for growth for you. It's just not possible. The laws of nature will not allow it, because we are autonomous beings, and if we're internally oppressive towards ourselves, we will resist. That's a fundamental way that we operate as a natural being. So if you can understand that concept, then there's something of value here for you. Alright, so once I watched this video, I went back into the group and I put this comment up. So let me just pop it up. I'm just going to zoom in so you can see it better. I'm really interested to know why so many so-called free thinkers attach to this guy and promote him as a voice of freedom when he's riddled with contradiction. Okay, so thankfully I got a response, and let me zoom it in, so you can see it. I don't see him as that, but it may be because of his advocacy for free speech, which was basically how he found his fame, as to why he's perceived this way. So that's a lot of really beautiful insight in here, right? So this is really exposing it, right? So what happens is people say something that appeals, they hear something that appeals to them, one of their pain points, and then they start attaching to somebody as someone that, is an advocate for them and is a voice for them, right? So this was my response. I need to zoom in again. Hopefully you can see that. Appreciate the clarity, my friend. Here's something to ponder. What if free speech is a euphemism for vocalized violence? Now, very few people are going to understand that, so I'll read what's written, and I'll see if I can elaborate on that. Would it not stand that the militant for free speech have one common denominator, the inability to differentiate observation, which is universal intelligence, from evaluation, which is egoic attachment? Now, in the history of it, whenever I've asked this question for people to define observation and tell me how it's distinct from their opinion, they think they're actually doing that. It's the same as when I've asked them what's the difference between knowledge and belief, and I get the same answer. They can't tell the difference between an observation and an evaluation. They don't have the ability to be able to do that, and that is common across the board. Right? I've seen that over and over, and this is the tragedy. This is why people get sucked in so quickly, because they confuse their opinions as observations, and they'll say it. They'll say, "I've observed," and then everything that follows that is their opinion, right? It's a thought. It's something that's a subjective reality for them. If you really pay attention, you'll hear it, but you need to know what to listen out for to know how to spot it. Speaking to liberate the mind from its invisible prison of egoic attachment is an entirely different energy. Those who seek for the latter do not seek notoriety. So there's one of the most biggest fundamentalist principles right there. If you are someone who's advocating for truth, you have no investment in being a figure, right? At best, you're just going to be someone who, puts some knowledge out there and leave it for others to take and leave as they please. But you're not going to want to be known, because that's not what knowledge is about. It's not for you and your personality and this idea of who you are to be elevated and held in high regard. That's not what sharing knowledge is about. That's about, getting glory. Right? And they're two different things. One, appeals to the ego. The other one appeals to the conscience. I'm wondering if you can figure out the difference. Very few have disciplined their divine faculties for the purpose of differentiating seduction from reality. And the ones who cannot differentiate the two opposing energetic expressions will by default attach to figures such as this. So if you are unwilling or incapable, or whatever the situation has to be, you might be fully traumatized, able to activate your divine intelligence, because we all have it, right? If we didn't, we wouldn't be crying as babies every time we had a sore tummy, or were hungry, or we needed burping. We don't need anyone to tell us these things. We know how to do it, right? So we're born with that intelligence of what we need for our survival, right? And that just is always there. Children, before they're gotten to, right, and punished and given rewards, they are the highest expression of intelligence. That's the tragedy. And what do we do with them? We say things like, you should be seen and not heard, right? We suppress that out of them. And that's happened to every individual. This is the collective trauma that we're suffering. And because of that, then we move into the egoic attachments of the stories we tell ourselves about what we needed to invent in our minds in order to survive such a violating structure. And then when you have that level of violation, that level of trauma, it's very difficult for you to reattach to that intelligence, because when you operated out of that space, you were punished mercilessly. And that's what the state does. It does what the parent does to the child, the state does to the adult who's still a child. It's the same structure. There's no difference. Because those very people who end up being in positions of power, they grew up with the same type of trauma, except for them, they sort of assumed in their minds that they have a birthright to do this to other people. Right? That's the ones who get attracted to being in those positions. And if we abdicate our own responsibility to take charge of ourselves, then we create that vacuum that brings those people in. As soon as we start denying any version of responsibility that belongs to us, that came with us, because we are in charge of ourselves by the sheer fact that we're consciousness in physical expression. No one else is in charge of this physical skin suit that we're wearing, right? It is us. And if we abdicate responsibility for what it does, then someone else is going to make use of that. Okay, sadly their number are vast, and why enslavement is deepening. Okay, so I'm hoping that I made a bit more sense out of that, if you're wondering. And then this was another response I got, so let me just zoom in. He appears as a father figure over the past 20 so years. Masculinity has been demonized, and some men have lost their way, cultural Marxism. Now that's a really big statement there, like there's a lot being given away there. What did I just say about the parent structure? If you can't be your own adult, then you're going to look to someone else to do it for you, right? So when you're an infant, you don't get to choose how food gets into your mouth, like hydration, clothes, to stay warm, what you're going to sleep in, that's all done for you, right? So you're totally dependent. And so that kind of dependency is, if you don't grow up and become your own adult, your own father, then you are going to look externally. And that's what, I don't believe the individual who wrote this, my guess is, understands just how beautiful they've articulated this, and why the control system is still running, and why he is elevated into that status, because he supports it, right? Because people, once they look outward for some kind of direction and guidance to someone else, like they know better than them, that's slavery right there. He is reinforcing what it is to be a man. By whose definition? That's the first question I'll be asking. And that is the attraction. I mean, seriously, if someone's got to tell you what it is to be a man, like, you're in deep trouble, right? If you can't figure that out for yourself, like, this is going to keep happening. The slavery system's going to keep going. He is a flawed individual, as are we all, and I do not agree with everything he has to say, but he does make some compelling points, especially about taking responsibility and not being a victim. Now, just because someone makes some compelling points, does that mean that we now still promote them into, some level of status where they what they say matters, right? Is that the next logical thing that needs to happen, right? Because you can have a conversation with someone and you can agree with them to some point and then disagree with others. Do you start promoting them, as someone of value, that you want everyone to hear about, right? Someone that you just run into in the street. So what's different here, right? So we've got to really start looking into how people come to their conclusions and how much they really understand about what they're doing and what they're saying, So I just wanted to express my gratitude for these comments, the people who bothered to give some insight into their way of seeing reality, because it really, this is what other people I've noticed, they come from those spaces too. But until they put it forward, you can't actually know. So these are two beautiful examples that, I'm guessing exists on a greater expanse as to why there's such a thing as people being held up into pedestals. And sadly, just how far away individuals are from really activating their own divine intelligence, and they're still in that space of suppressing and oppressing it. Now, if you've come to a place that you actually want to activate, then I suggest you watch the next aspect of this video, because it has like the information for you to start educating yourself. These are self-evident truths. You can discover it. It's all discoverable. You can find it when you look it up. It's all there for you to discover. It all stands on sound moral principle. You can test it for yourself. And then if you're at that place where you're really willing to do that, then I highly recommend you watch and then start activating. Okay, so if you're serious about your own education, this is the site that's it's got pretty much the majority of things you require to understand the principles that are embedded in the laws of nature that we as living beings have understood, and I guess have devised a system which adheres to those principles. And so this site obviously is magnacarta1215.com. All of Magna Carta is not what we're about. It's about the articles of common law. Common law is just the man's best understanding through the conduit of the conscience of how the laws of nature operate. That's all common law really means. So just want to scroll down. Got some info here. You can read that in your own time, but here's a real quick explainer of the 1901 Commonwealth of Australia Constitution, why it's a fraud, why it's your ticket to slavery, and basically why you're going to stay imprisoned if you keep following it and thinking there's some validity. So obviously the title's a bit different. It's called the 1901 Crime and Punishment Manifesto, so you can watch that. It's only about 2.5 minutes, so it's nice and quick. And then I want to take you here, because this really explains the whole 1215 Magna Carta. Just scroll right down to the bottom here, and it's the frequently asked Q&As, right? You click on that, download that. That explains it. It's got a bunch of other things about how to deal with the police. It's got a lot of relevant information to today. Also the history of what the 1215 actually was, as far as an agreement that allows for a system of public servants who are accountable to we the people. That's all it really is. So download that. That's got in there. It's got it's about 15 pages, I think. So there's really in-depth explanation into history, today, and the oath, what that really means. So, if you're really interested about taking ownership of your own learning and stop relying on other people, because if you're a true sovereign, you don't rely on the word of others, right? It just doesn't work like that. You need to take that into your own hands and figure it out for yourself. And there's resources here if you want to. You use your own discernment to decide whether that sits with your inherent understanding of the true nature of morality, or whether it sits outside of it. And can you distinguish the difference between your biases, prejudices, and your conscience? Right? Not everyone's capable of doing that. So if you're in that space where you're ready to do that, here's this place where you can start activating and really advancing your learning, because without the knowledge, you can't do the next step, right? Everything starts with your knowing. All right, that's it.